Hey y'all, Casey here. If I haven't said it enough already, I'm trans. There are a lot of pros and cons that come along with being trans. One of the cons, one of the things that most trans folks struggle with at one time or another, is the idea of passing. I know I did, and still do to some extent. What is passing, you might ask? Well, in the trans context, passing refers to one's ability to be perceived by others as looking consistent with your gender identity. In other words, if you're a trans woman and you're trying to pass, you're hoping that people perceive you and interact with you as a woman. If you're a trans man and you're trying to pass, then you are trying to be perceived as and interacted with as a man. Early on in my transition, passing was an obsession. Passing was this holy grail that I constantly strove for. Why was it so important to me? Well, for one, early on in my transition, I was hyper-focused on how I looked. I wore a full face of makeup every single day. I can actually remember the first day that I left my house without makeup on, and it was like 2 years into my transition. Anytime I would walk in front of a mirror, I would dress myself down and search for every single little flaw. On top of that, I would also pay absurd attention to every little change my body was going through. Hormones change your body at a glacial pace, so focusing on all these little changes, while exciting, was also soul-crushing. This obsession was a new form of self-inflicted torture. This obsession with how I looked was in part due to the dam burst of dysphoria that led to me making my transition. My obsession with passing and my looks was also fueled by wanting to be able to just exist in the world and feel safer. There were many experiences that I had the joy of enduring as a result of my transition. Some of those experiences include being stared at almost any time I left my house, being called all sorts of terrible names by strangers on the street, people refusing to help me, people treating me differently because of how I looked, and people getting up in my face and being assaultive. Since all of this seemed to be a result of my transitioning, I thought that perhaps if I looked a little less trans, then the harassment would stop. How I looked became a safety issue. As time went on, thanks to research and hormones and practice and surgery, I started to look a lot more like how I felt on the inside. The harassment didn't stop though. When I got clocked, my mind would go over every detail of the interaction with the person who clocked me. I would scrutinize every little thing that I did. What thing did I do wrong? What can I fix for next time? Was my makeup coming off? Was it my walk? Was it my small chest? What was it? My mind would just race and think about all these things. For those who don't know, being clocked in the trans community is when people realize that you're trans, or in other words, they realize that you're not cis. Being clocked is the opposite of passing. If you're trying to pass, it's the one thing that you're trying to avoid. Sometimes when I would get clocked, I would even ask the people how they clocked me. It makes me cringe now, but it's true. And they would usually just tell me something like, "Oh, I just knew," or "Oh, I don't know." Almost never giving me any hint as to how I could be better, which was just an added level of frustration. And that was not helpful. That gave me nothing to work on or be better at or whatever. it just made my mind go even crazier. This is not to say that the level of harassment that I face didn't decrease when I looked classically more feminine. There was definitely a reduction. However, that reduction made me scrutinize myself all the more. It made me think, well, if I can just close that last little gap, if I can just be a little bit less trans looking, if I can pass a little bit better, then maybe it'll all go away. Maybe if I got one more surgery, or if I changed one more little thing, or if I jacked my voice up just a little bit more, then maybe the harassment would stop. This obsessing and self-scrutinizing was obviously not healthy. I felt like Sisyphus trying to complete this impossible task. Every time I would think I was getting a little bit closer, I would get knocked right back down again. This unhealthy cycle went on and on. Sometimes it was more prominent than others, but generally it was always there. Then, one day, I was at one of my neighborhood bars, and I started talking to this waitress who was super sweet, and she happened to be trans. We got to talking about a whole bunch of things and eventually started to talk about passing. She was a little bit older than me and had been out for a few more years than I, so had a little bit more experience, and she mentioned how thankful she was that passing wasn't necessarily this holy grail that trans people had to strive for anymore, that we could just be ourselves. I nodded and smiled and agreed, but embarrassingly, I had never really thought that. I had never really given this idea much thought. I had never really considered about not worrying about passing. In my mind, passing was that pot of gold at the end of the transitioning rainbow. I thought that passing was the only way that a trans person could have a happy life. Thankfully, that sweet woman's words stuck in my brain. I continued to mull them over the next few days and weeks, and they started to take hold. Eventually, I started to accept that passing shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to eliminate dysphoria, or at least minimize it, to make yourself feel like who you are inside, not who the rest of the world wants you to be. You should be doing this for yourself, not because of outside forces. I knew this to some degree, but the issue of safety kept me focused on passing. My next realization was that safety is relative. As a trans woman, passing can minimize or eliminate some safety concerns. However, even if you are perceived as a woman, you can still face other harassment. Which seems like such an obvious idea now, but it took me a long time to figure that out. It's not about achieving 100% safety. It's about minimizing the safety risks you do face. Rather than allow myself to remain a prisoner of my own self-esteem destroying, self-scrutinizing, I decided to accept myself for who I am. I accepted that passing was not my goal, and that was immensely freeing. As for the safety issue, I've just improved my ability to defend myself. Even before my transition, I generally kept weapons, but now you'll never catch me without a weapon on my person. You'd be surprised at how frequently they come in handy. Before I conclude, I just want to note that it is not my intention to portray myself as someone who never thinks about passing. I'm not perfect. There are times when it does jump to the fore of my mind, and I do feel like I still need to use some of my passing skills for safety's sake. But the idea of passing is no longer a constant looming specter in my life. Thanks to this shift, I'm happier, less anxious, and more confident. My hope is that this video will help at least one other person out there make that change. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you got something out of this video, please click those like and subscribe buttons. Until next time.